I stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, heart caged behind a paper-thin smile. Balloons lined the ceiling. Her mother waved from across the room. Her brother clapped me on the back like I belonged here. But I didn't. Because when the lights dimmed and the cake rolled in, her voice rang out like a bullet in a cathedral. "To my boyfriend Aaron!" The applause was thunder, the laughter, a storm. And I stood there, forgotten. She didn't glance at me, not even once. The man she toasted had a Rolex and wine-stained lips. I had calluses and 4 years of sacrifices buried under receipts and shame. I'd emptied my savings when the loan sharks came to her family's door. I'd sold my car, pawned my watch, worked double shifts just so her father wouldn't lose the house. She had cried on my shoulder the night her gallery shut down, but in that room, I was no one. "Just a friend," she said when her aunt asked who I was. My name dried in my throat like unsaid poetry, and in that moment, as the candles flickered, I realized I hadn't just lost her love, I'd lost myself trying to be her safety net. That night, I didn't say a word, but I started writing the story that would make sure no one ever forgot what she did. It was winter when her father showed up at my door. I remember the way the light fell on him, faint, tired, the street lamp behind casting a long shadow that seemed to swallow him whole. His coat was worn thin, his shoulders hunched as if every mistake he'd made in life had finally found their way home to him. He didn't step in right away, just stood there, eyes fixed on the floor, like a man rehearsing the words he'd rather die than say. When he finally looked up, there was nothing proud left in him. "They'll take the house," he said. His voice cracked on the word house, like he wasn't just talking about walls and a roof, but about memories, about his wife's laughter in the kitchen, about the corner where his daughter had once taken her first steps. The silence between us stretched until it hurt. I wasn't rich, I wasn't even steady. My own rent came late more often than not, but I was in love with his daughter, and that made me reckless. She didn't ask me to help, she didn't have to. I sold my guitar first, the one I'd been saving since I was 17, my escape when the world was too loud. The pawnshop owner didn't even look me in the eye when he counted out the bills. Then went my car, my freedom traded for bus rides and cold waits at midnight stops. And when that wasn't enough, I sold my nights. By day, I worked as a security guard in a dim-lit building that smelled faintly of bleach and dust. By night, I packed boxes in a warehouse where the air was so cold it bit at my fingers. Coffee became my blood, silence my constant companion. The world blurred into shifts and paychecks, into numbers I scribbled on the back of receipts. And in the spaces between exhaustion, I'd see her. She'd come by my apartment sometimes, always dressed in that effortless way she had, hair swept up, cheeks flushed from the cold, a smile that seemed to warm the whole room. She'd lean on the counter, sipping tea I'd made, scrolling on her phone as if nothing in her life was on fire. "You're my rock," she'd say, sometimes out of nowhere, and I'd smile, letting the words sink into me like a promise. But even then, I knew rock meant something different to her than it did to me. To me, it meant foundation. To her, it meant something that stayed where it was, no matter how little she noticed it. I never told her about the guitar, never told her about the car. I didn't want her to feel guilty, and I didn't want her to think I was buying her love. But I did hope, quietly, foolishly, that someday she'd look at me and see more than the man holding her family together with tired hands. One night, after a 14-hour shift, I passed by her family's house. The lights were on, the windows glowing warm against the frost. Inside, I could see them around the dinner table, her laughing at something her brother said, her father looking lighter than he had in months. I stood there for a long time, my breath turning to smoke in the air. That was all I wanted, to know they were safe, even if they never knew the cost. But safety has a strange way of turning invisible. The more you give, the less people see. Weeks turned into months, the debt shrinking in numbers, while something else inside me hollowed out. I'd catch her eyes drifting to her phone when we were together, her smiles becoming distracted, like her mind was already somewhere else. And yet, every time she said, "You're my rock," I stayed. I thought if I kept standing firm, maybe she'd finally lean toward me, not just on me. I was wrong. But back then, in that first winter, I believed love was about carrying someone through their storms. I didn't realize some people don't look back to see who's still standing in the rain. And as I fell into bed that night, my hands aching, my breath heavy with exhaustion, I didn't know that truth yet, that the debt I was paying wasn't just in money, it was in pieces of myself I'd never get back. There was a day in late spring when the sun filtered through her curtains like melted gold, and she leaned over her coffee with that sleepy, perfect smile. "You're so good to me," she whispered. It sounded like affection, like warmth wrapping around my ribs. But looking back now, I realize it wasn't love, it was permission. Permission to keep giving without asking. To bleed quietly in the name of devotion. That morning, she didn't notice the bandages on my fingers, taped clumsily after a warehouse shelf collapsed and my hands had taken the brunt of it. She just held her mug, legs curled up on my couch like she owned the air around her, talking about a dress she wanted to buy for an upcoming gallery opening. I nodded, told her it would look stunning on her. And that night, I added another item to the list of things I'd sacrifice next. A week later, her voice shook through the phone. "Mom's insurance didn't cover it, the surgery's next week, I don't know what to do." My chest went cold. Not because I hesitated, but because I didn't. I already knew I'd say yes. I picked up a temp night shift at the docks, paid under the table, 12-hour hauls, salt in my lungs, splinters in my palms. Each night, I dragged my body home, collapsed into dreams that smelled like disinfectant and ocean rot. She never saw that part, she just texted me updates, emojis, a heart when the surgery went well, and then another. "You're so good to me." I should have seen the pattern. The next time was her credit card. "Fraudulent charges," she said, but when I checked the statements, I saw designer names I didn't recognize, places we'd never been together, receipts dated on nights I was working. Still, I paid it, convinced myself it didn't matter what she spent it on. I wasn't her accountant, I was her anchor, right? That's what I told myself. But even anchors rust if they're never pulled back to shore. She never kissed me on the mouth, always the cheek, a light peck, a thank you. Like I was a helpful driver, not the man breaking himself open to build her a life raft. And I let it happen. I told myself it was patience. That intimacy would come, that one day she'd look at me and realize I'd been the steady rhythm in her chaos all along. But intimacy without intention is just performance, and love without reciprocity is worship. One night, after wiring money to cover yet another bill I never asked about, I stood in the shower longer than usual. The water was scalding hot, but I felt cold anyway. Steam clung to the mirror. I wiped it clean, only to stare into eyes that barely recognized themselves anymore. There were shadows beneath them. My jaw had tightened into something permanent, my smile had become a rumor. In the fogged-up glass, I didn't look like a man in love, I looked like a man haunted by love. We met again 2 days later at a cafe she liked, an aesthetic place with flower walls and tiny cups. She was late, wore new earrings, didn't mention where they came from. "Sorry," she said, brushing her hair over one shoulder. "Aaron surprised me after yoga, he just..." She stopped. Eyes flicked up, as if catching herself. "Never mind." My stomach tightened. "Who's Aaron?" I asked quietly. She blinked. "Oh. Just a friend." The way she said it. So casual, so rehearsed. I nodded. But something cracked. Not loudly. Not like a plate hitting tile. Just a quiet, hollow click inside my chest. Later that night, I walked past my old guitar in the pawn shop window. It was still there, price tag faded, strings loosened, like it had been waiting for someone to remember it meant something. I stood there for a long time, longer than I'd like to admit. And in the glass reflection, I saw myself again. Not the man who worked himself raw, not the rock she leaned on, but someone forgotten, even by the person he loved most. "Thank you," she texted the next morning, a heart emoji, another, "You're so good to me," and I stared at it, for a long, long time. I didn't reply. Because even saints eventually stop praying, when the altar they kneel at burns to the ground. Ixus. It was raining the night I met him, the kind of soft, misting rain that doesn't fall, it settles, quiet, ironic, like the sky knew something I didn't. I was already tired, my shift had dragged into overtime, and the call from her came while I was halfway through reheating instant noodles. "Come by," she said. "A few friends are here, I want you to meet someone." I didn't ask who, didn't think I needed to. In my mind, I was still the one who stayed, the one who carried the weight behind her smiles. So I pulled on the jacket she bought me last winter, navy blue, slightly tight now, and walked out into the rain like a man heading towards something good. Her apartment was louder than usual, glasses clinked, laughter spilled from the windows like seas. Smoke. When I stepped in, my heart slowed for a second. She was glowing. Not metaphorically, not in some poetic way. Actually glowing under the warm bulbs. Cheeks flushed, eyes sharp and laughing, dressed like she wasn't used to worrying anymore, and beside her stood him, Aaron. He was the kind of man who didn't need to announce himself, his presence did it for him. Crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled just enough, gold watch that matched his tan, smile too perfect to be honest. And that scent, subtle but deliberate. A man who knew exactly how expensive his cologne was, and how it felt to be wanted the moment he entered a room. She looked between us like she was holding a secret. Then, smiling, she said the words that still ring in my ears. "This is my friend," she said, motioning toward me. "And this is Aaron. He's special." Just like that. Friend. Special. I shook his hand, still damp from the rain. His grip was firm, confident, the kind of grip that says, "I win without trying." I matched it, but my smile didn't reach my eyes, because my stomach had already started twisting. Still, I smiled, because that's what friends do, right? The evening blurred after that. They floated around the kitchen together, passing wine bottles, trading glances, brushing arms like it was muscle memory. Every laugh felt like a secret code, every shared glance, a language I hadn't learned. I watched them from the corner of the couch, fingers wrapped around a lukewarm glass of soda. They talked about gallery openings I hadn't heard of, shared memories I wasn't part of, cities I'd never visited, nights I hadn't been invited to. And still, she hadn't told me who he really was. I told myself not to assume, not to let my insecurities script the story, but truth has a way of making itself known, quietly, cruelly. At one point, she excused herself to grab something from her room. Aaron leaned against the counter, sipping his wine, then glanced at me. "She's something, huh?" he said, smiling. I nodded. "She really is." He tilted his head, studying me with a kind of amused curiosity. "You two known each other long?" "Couple years," I said. "Been through a lot." He raised his eyebrows. "She didn't say much about you." That's when I felt it, the sharp, invisible line she'd drawn. The distance I had denied. The title I had held in my heart, she had quietly erased in conversation. Later that night, I went to the kitchen for water. They didn't see me. She was standing close to him, laughing, really laughing. The kind of laugh she used to save for late nights with me on the fire escape, when the world was too quiet and her guard was down. "Remember that night in Lisbon?" she giggled. "How could I forget?" he replied. They clinked their glasses like they were sealing a secret. Lisbon. She had told me she was visiting her aunt that week, had texted me pictures of books and tea and rainy streets. I never questioned it, because love is blind, and trust is what fools build altars out of. I stood in the hallway for a long time, the refrigerator hummed behind me, her laughter echoing ahead, and I realized I had been building a life with someone who had already started building hers with someone else, not loudly, not cruelly, but quietly, with inside jokes, and cities I'd never touch, and names I was never meant to know. I left without saying goodbye. I walked out into the rain again, same sky, same street. But something was different. I wasn't angry, not yet, just hollow. Like I had opened a door expecting warmth, and found a stranger living where I used to stand. And even though I had been the one to answer her call, the truth was, she had stopped calling me long ago. The message didn't come from her, it came from her brother. A single line, casual like a raindrop on glass. "Hey, come to her birthday, she'd love to see you." No punctuation, no voice note, no warmth, just enough to sound polite, but not enough to sound wanted. I stared at it for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen, not typing back. She could have messaged me herself, but she didn't. And still, I said yes. Because when you're still in love with someone who's already walking away, even silence sounds like an open door. I didn't buy her a gift, I couldn't afford to. But I had something else, something I'd been working on quietly between shifts, when my eyes stung from warehouse dust and my hands shook from exhaustion. A sketch. Charcoal, soft line, drawn on the back of old shipping receipts until I found paper worth keeping. Her face, the way I remembered it. Not from Instagram or stories, but from us, from moments no one else saw. The way her mouth curled when she spoke about dreams, the crease between her brows when she concentrated, the almost smile she wore when she let her guard down at 2 a.m. I'd drawn it with the precision of someone trying to remember the last time they mattered, and framed it in wood I sanded myself. Not money, just hours, just love, just hope. The night of her birthday, the sky was cruelly beautiful, orange streaks melting into lavender dusk, too cinematic for how my chest felt, tight, unsure, already bracing for disappointment. I wore a shirt she once said looked good on me, held the wrapped frame like it was fragile truth, told myself over and over, this will mean something. Maybe this time, she'd look at me and see, not the helper, not the rock, but the man who had always chosen her. Her place was already full when I arrived, laughter spilling into the hallway, heels clacking against hardwood floors, voices rising and falling like waves. I paused before knocking, tried to steady my breath, and then, the door opened before I could lift my hand. Her brother grinned. "Hey man, you made it." Like I was a guest, not history, not devotion, just someone on the list. I stepped in. The warmth hit first, the candles, the lights, the clinking glasses. Then the cold, not in temperature, in recognition. Because she didn't look at me, not when I walked in, not when I set the gift down, not when I stood there, waiting. She was across the room, head tilted back in laughter, arm looped around someone I didn't know, not Aaron, someone new. I blinked, swallowed. She had changed her hair, shorter now, edgier. I wondered if she even remembered how I once spent an hour untangling her curls in silence because she was too tired to do it herself. Eventually, her eyes found me, and for the briefest moment, something passed across her face, recognition, guilt, nostalgia. I couldn't tell. Then she smiled, a party smile, too wide, too empty, the kind you wear when you don't want to explain anything. She walked over, took a glass from a tray. "Hey, you came." 3 words. That was it. I nodded. "Happy birthday." I gestured toward the gift. She glanced at it. "Oh, thanks, that's sweet of you." That's sweet of you, like I was a polite neighbor, not the man who once picked up her mother's medication at 3 a.m., not the man who paid her tuition bill when she was too scared to tell her father it was overdue. I smiled anyway, because what else was there to do? She drifted off minutes later, back to her circle of people who didn't know me, back to music I didn't recognize and conversations I couldn't join. I stood there, still holding my empty glass. The sketch sat on the gift table, unopened. Just paper and hope wrapped in silence. I slipped out before the cake came. Didn't want to see who stood next to her when she blew out her candles, didn't want to see whose name was written in frosting this year. Outside, the night had cooled, the wind moved like a memory, brushing past my skin without staying. I walked slowly, let the weight settle, not in my hands this time, but in my chest. I had given her something more than art. I had drawn her with the eyes of a man who knew her, but maybe that was the problem. She didn't want to be known, not by me, not anymore. And still, a part of me hoped she'd open that sketch. And maybe, just maybe, remember what it looked like to be truly loved. Asunari Tirga. The room was bathed in gold. Not from wealth, but from fairy lights strung across the ceiling like constellations trying too hard to impress. It was warm, crowded with bodies and laughter, clinking glasses, the scent of vanilla candles and wine lingering in the air. She stood in the center of it all, glowing, hair tucked behind one ear, lips glossed like she knew exactly where every camera was. Her dress shimmered with every movement. But what struck me most was her smile. It was brighter than I remembered, and emptier too, like a flame that burned only for the room, not for anyone inside it. I hovered near the drink table. No one noticed me. I watched her drift from one conversation to the next, laughing like the past year hadn't buried itself in my lungs, like I hadn't folded parts of myself into origami just to keep her from falling apart. She walked with him, Aaron. Of course it was him, in a suit that fit too perfectly, with a voice too smooth to be real. He stood behind her like he belonged, like he had been the one holding her together all this time. And she let him. She leaned into him, whispered something into his ear. He laughed, then whispered something back. She laughed louder, louder than I'd ever heard her laugh with me. That laugh used to belong to late-night fire escapes and half-eaten takeout. Now, it belonged to him. I took a sip of wine and felt it burn down the hollow I used to call a throat. Then, someone dimmed the lights. Voices quieted. A hand tapped a glass. The clinking sound echoed through the room like a countdown. And she stepped forward, holding her drink up, smile wide, posture flawless. The center of the universe. The girl I once believed I'd orbit forever. "I just want to say thank you," she began, her voice ringing clear. People leaned in. I didn't. I already knew. "Thank you all for being here, for making me feel loved." She paused, her eyes landed on him, not me. And then, the sentence that still bruises the inside of my skull. "To Aaron, my boyfriend, my future." Time didn't stop, it moved, but it moved without me. Everyone lifted their glasses, everyone clapped, and I just stood there, a glass in hand, untouched, my throat closed like a fist, my jaw clenched tight enough to crack a prayer. I didn't know if I wanted to cry or disappear, so I did neither. I just watched. As she leaned into his kiss on the cheek, as he wrapped an arm around her waist, as if this was always how the story was meant to end. Then came the final blow. Her aunt, elegant in her age, turned toward me. She squinted politely, glass in hand, and asked, without cruelty, just curiosity, "Who's that?" The question hung in the air like fog, and in that 1 second, she looked at me, dead in the eyes, not startled, not soft, just detached, like I was a placeholder she forgot to erase, and then she smiled, polished, perfect, practiced. "Just a friend." 3 words. That's all it took. Not a thank you, not a nod to the man who sold his nights for her family's peace, not even a memory. Just a friend. As if I hadn't painted her face from memory in charcoal, as if I hadn't been the hands she clutched at 3 a.m. when she thought the world was ending, as if I hadn't been the silence that listened when no one else stayed. The worst part? No one else flinched, because no one else knew, no one else saw. I smiled again, because heartbreak has a script, and I'd rehearsed mine well. I left before the cake, before the candles, before I saw them kiss again. Outside, the sky was clear, stars burned in indifference. I stood there for a second, clutching the frame I had made, now wrapped and forgotten on the gift table behind me. It held her. The version of her I used to know. The version who once looked at me like I mattered. I should have smashed it, should have shouted, should have demanded the years back. But I didn't. Because love that was never seen doesn't get a dramatic ending, it's just ends. I didn't say goodbye. Not to her, not to her brother, not to the room that once held all my unspoken hope, like it mattered. I walked out slowly, quietly, like someone leaving a memory behind. Not a scene, not a confrontation, just letting go. The sketch I had drawn, my hours, my nights, my silence, still sat on the gift table, wrapped in brown paper, tied with a string that had frayed at the edge. She hadn't unwrapped it, hadn't even looked at it twice. But I didn't take it back. That would have made it feel like a transaction, and what I gave her was never something she owed me for. Let her open it in the quiet, let her see herself through the eyes of someone who loved her before the mirrors and the flashbulbs and the curated spotlight. Let her realize, maybe one day, maybe too late, that I loved her in a way money can't buy and parties can't celebrate. Outside, the night had grown colder, crisp and sharp against my skin. No music, no voices, just the soft echo of my footsteps on the sidewalk and the sound of the wind threading through the trees like whispers. I stopped halfway down the block, stared up at the sky. It was clear, star-sprayed and silent, too beautiful for the kind of sadness that had been following me like a shadow for months. I took a breath, a deep one, the kind that reaches places pain usually lives. And something shifted. It wasn't heartbreak anymore, it was clarity. She didn't break me that night, she didn't even bend me, she just revealed me, to myself. Unwrapped the last illusion I'd been holding, that maybe, if I gave enough, waited long enough, sacrificed enough, she'd choose me. But she didn't, she never had, she just let me orbit her, like a satellite mistaking gravity for love. I walked with steadier steps after that, passed by the bakery we used to stop at after midnight walks. The light was still on, The same old woman still behind the counter, her hair tucked into a scarf, humming a tune I didn't recognize. I didn't go in. Some places are better left untouched once the memories sour. By the time I got home, it was almost midnight. I took off my shoes, hung up my coat, sat on the floor instead of the couch, and breathed again. No tears, no shaking hands, just quiet. And in that quiet, I realized something I hadn't dared to admit before. I was finally done loving someone who only loved being loved. The gift was still hers, but the giving, that was mine, and so was the healing. Maybe she'd open it next week, maybe never, maybe it'd end up in a drawer or under someone else's coffee mug. But it didn't matter, because that sketch was the last piece of her I carried, and I left it behind, on purpose. People think freedom comes with doors slamming and voices raised, but sometimes freedom looks like walking away from a room that didn't see you, and not looking back. It started with a blank page, the kind that feels heavier than it looks, heavier because it knows you're about to bleed on it. Not in red ink, but in truth. I didn't write to her. I wrote to the man I used to be. The one who stood in a golden lit room, invisible. The one who stayed long after he should have left. The one who mistook being needed for being loved. The words came slowly at first. Then all at once, like a flood held back too long. I wrote about the night her father came to me with shaking hands, about the bills I paid with hours she never saw, the bruises on my palms, the ache behind my ribs, the way she looked at other men like they were the answer to a question I had spent years trying to ask. I wrote about love, not the kind from movies, but the kind where you give and give and give until there's nothing left but a smile you wear like armor. I didn't name her, I didn't need to, because this wasn't revenge, it was release. And I didn't sign it with my real name either, just an alias, simple, forgettable. But the title had teeth. The boy who paid for her dream and got erased. I uploaded it to a small blog site, no ads, no photos, just black text on white background. Then I closed my laptop and went to sleep. For the first time in months, I actually slept. Not the kind where your body rests but your mind runs marathons, the kind where silence feels safe. I didn't check the stats for a week, didn't need to. I had already let go the moment I hit publish. But when I finally opened the site again, the numbers made my breath catch. Thousands of shares. Tens of thousands of reads. Comments pouring in like rain on a tin roof. This story broke me. I've been him. I didn't know anyone else felt this invisible. Whoever you are, thank you. People started calling it a confession wrapped in poetry. Others called it a mirror they weren't ready to look into. It spread like wildfire, because pain, when told honestly, always finds its echo. And somewhere along the way, she found it too. I knew it the moment I saw her name in the email inbox. No subject, just the timestamp and her initials. My hand hovered over the mouse. I didn't open it right away, just stared. Because I wasn't sure what would hurt more, her silence or her apology. When I finally clicked it open, it was only a few lines. I read your story. I didn't know I did that to you. I'm sorry I wasn't who you thought I was. No signature, no follow-up, just an ending dressed up like closure. And somehow, that was enough. She didn't ask if it was about her. She didn't need to. Some truths don't need confirmation. They just sit with you, like echoes in a room you used to call home. The letter I never mailed became the story that found thousands of hearts. Not to get her back, but to remind myself I was never weak for loving her. Only wrong for staying when I wasn't seen. And now, when I walk past bookstores and see people thumbing through printed pages, or when someone stops me and says, "That story, it saved me," I smile, not because I won, but because I finally ended something I didn't know was still bleeding. Sometimes, the most powerful stories aren't about revenge, they're about remembering yourself loud enough that the world starts to listen. It came on a quiet afternoon. No storm, no dramatic music swelling in the background, just the sun slipping through the blinds in stripes and the hum of a kettle boiling in the background. 3 months had passed. I had stopped counting after the first 30 days. Grief has a way of feeling like an ache in the bones, but only until you finally stop checking your phone, hoping for their name to light it up. And yet, there it was. Her name. On the screen. Simple. Unchanged. Familiar, in a way that made my chest tighten out of instinct, not desire. I stared at it. The message preview was already enough to shatter and heal at the same time. I didn't know how much you did for me, I'm sorry. That was it. No punctuation, no paragraphs, no flood of confessions or grand gestures. Just a sentence, late, soft, and far too small for the damage it was meant to acknowledge. I didn't reply, not because I hated her, I never did. Even now, I don't. Hate requires energy. Hate still holds a thread to the heart, and mine had long since stopped reaching for her. I didn't reply, because I had nothing left to give. Not another piece of myself, not another sentence she could forget. Her regret wasn't love, it was recognition that she had walked through me like fog for years, only to realize too late that I had been the one holding up the scaffolding beneath her dreams. And I could have replied. I could have said, I know, or, it is okay. Or maybe even, you were worth it, until you weren't. But that would have reopened the wound I had already sewn shut with ink, story, and silence. So I let it sit there. Unread. Unanswered. Like a pebble tossed into an ocean that no longer made ripples for her. By then, the world already knew my name. Not as her friend, not as the ghost at her party, not as the boy in the background of someone else's photograph, but as the man who turned heartbreak into legacy. Bookstores stocked my essay collection. Panels invited me to speak on vulnerability, sacrifice, and the price of invisible love. Emails came daily, people telling me how much my words meant to them. One line kept repeating in their messages. I thought I was the only one. Funny how pain becomes communal once you finally say it out loud. And with every comment, every letter, every handshake, her absence mattered less. Not because she vanished, but because I stopped shrinking to make space for someone who never saw me clearly. I saw her once, weeks after her message. She was across the street, near a bookstore window where my book cover stared back at both of us. She stood still, one hand half lifted toward the glass, eyes caught in that strange limbo between pride and loss. She didn't notice me, or maybe she did and couldn't decide whether to cross the street or keep walking. I didn't wait to find out. I turned and left, not bitterly, just calmly. Because closure doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes, it comes from the quiet power of choosing not to go back. I never blocked her, never erased her messages, I didn't need to. The past doesn't scare me anymore, because I lived it, I survived it, and I turned it into something that will outlive us both. I hope she kept the sketch, not because I want her to hang it, but because one day, maybe after her next birthday or her next goodbye, she'll unwrap it again, and see herself, through the eyes, of someone who once loved her deeply and left her completely, and maybe then, she'll understand, I wasn't just so good to her, I was once everything she couldn't see until I was gone. It was the kind of room she would have loved, velvet seats, gold-rimmed glasses, chandeliers dripping like stars. The kind of place where people wore validation on their sleeves, and success hung in the air like expensive perfume. But this time, the spotlight wasn't on her, it was on me. I stood at the center of the stage, fingers curled around an award I hadn't dared to imagine months ago. Not because I didn't believe in my words, but because I didn't believe anyone would listen. Now, the silence in the room was thick, respectful, waiting. Dozens of faces stared back at me, some smiling, some blinking back emotion, some simply still. Like they'd just remembered something they, too, had tried to forget. I adjusted the mic, took a breath, and raised my glass. No script, no rehearsed speech, just truth, spoken softly. To everyone who gave their everything. And got nothing in return. The words didn't shake, because they weren't angry, they weren't bitter. They were free. They belonged to the version of me that once sat in silence while someone else toasted a future I was never going to be part of. And now, I was the one making the toast. The applause came. But it wasn't thunder, it wasn't loud or forced, it was healing. A soft crescendo of hands meeting hands, a room full of strangers saying, "We see you now." Not because I was loud, but because I was honest. And in that moment, I wasn't invisible anymore. I thought of her, of course I did. Not with longing, not even with ache, just a passing thought, like the shadow of a bird across pavement, noticed, then gone. She once stood in rooms like this, drinking in admiration like wine. Now she was somewhere else, watching from behind the screen. If she was watching at all. But I didn't need her to see me anymore. Because this stage, this silence, this soft applause, was mine. I was never just a friend. Never just the helper. Never just the man behind the curtain. I was the story. The one people underlined. The one people folded pages for. The one people wrote messages about, saying, "You told my truth before I could speak it." She was the footnote now. The brief mention in someone else's journey. A line that readers skimmed past on their way to something real, something earned, something mine. And isn't that the strangest kind of justice? Not the loud kind, but the poetic kind, the kind where you don't need revenge, because healing makes better echoes than hate ever could. After the ceremony, someone handed me a glass of wine, another asked for a picture, a young woman clutched a copy of the book and whispered, "I didn't know how to leave, until I read your words." I smiled gently, signed the inside cover, and said only one thing. "You were never alone, you just hadn't read your story yet." Later that night, I walked home, refused the car they offered, chose silence instead of celebration. The night was cold, crisp, and above me, the stars had returned. Real ones, not chandeliers. I passed a bookstore, my face was in the window, framed beside the title that once bled out of me like truth through trembling hands. I paused, not to admire, just to remember. That pain, when shaped with purpose, becomes legacy, and that love, even when unreturned, can still leave behind something unforgettable.